Hi, in this teaching I'd like us to look at chapters 1 and 2 and the consolidation of King Solomon's reign. And so we are introduced to the very end of David's reign and the process of how Solomon became king, even as the word of the Lord said that he would. In these times it was customary that when a new king came to power, that he would ruthlessly eliminate anybody who would be a threat to his reign. We see this in Italia in 2 Kings 11. When this woman became queen, she destroyed everybody in the line of David that she thought would be a threat. Now, in the providence of God, she didn't do that, as you know. But that's an example of the kind of thing that would happen. We see this in the northern kingdom over and over again, as the reign of the northern kingdom changed from one dynasty to another. But what we see is that Solomon takes a different approach. Now, firstly, we had Adonijah. He was one who felt he had a claim to the throne. We have Abiathar the priest, who supported him. We have Joab, the commander of the army, that also supported him. And we have Shimei. This was the man that cursed David during Absalom's reign. Obviously someone who was against the house of David. And then we have Barzillai, who supported David during that terrible time when David had to flee from Absalom's reign. And what we see in these chapters is Solomon dealing with unfinished business so that his throne would be established. Let's look at these one by one. Adonijah was actually the oldest son alive. When we look at First Chronicles and we look at the genealogy, we find the oldest son was Amnon, and he was killed by Absalom, you remember, because Amnon raped Absalom's sister. It was a revenge killing. We read in Chronicles about Daniel, the second born. We don't hear of him again, so presumably he died young. Then we have Absalom. Absalom rebelled against David, of course you remember, and he was killed by Joab, the army commander. And so the fourth in line was Adonijah. As you read these account in First Kings, there's something strange going on. Firstly, because when he wanted to become king, he did it in secret. He did it behind David's back. He invited all of his brothers to confirm his kingship, but he did not include Solomon. That tells us that he knew that Solomon was a designated king by God and by his father. Otherwise, why would he not have included him? And so when Solomon came to power, you'll notice that he didn't execute him, which would be the normal thing, but he allowed him to live. But when Adonijah came to Solomon's mother asking for Abishag to be his wife, what that indicated is that in his heart he hadn't given up his right to the throne. And because of this, he was killed by Benaniah. Benaniah was David's personal bodyguard, and he became the same for Solomon. Then we come to Abiathar the priest. Now Abiathar, the high priest, sided with Adonijah, He must have been well aware of what was going on. Why would Adonijah go away secretly to be made king? Why would he not include his father in this joyous and glorious event? So clearly it would seem that Adonijah was part of the conspiracy, and rather than execute him, there was mercy shown by Solomon, and he expelled him to his hometown of Anathoth. Now, Anathoth was one of the cities given to the Levites, and later on we see it's the home of Jeremiah. Just a side note. Abiathar the priest, was exiled there, and he had to spend the rest of his days no longer being involved as an active high priest. Now, Joab had a list of events connected to his name. Joab was the commander of David's army. The reason, when David was attacking Jerusalem, he said, the first one in is going to be the commander of my army. And Joab was the first in the city, first over the wall, so to speak, and he was given that role. Now, Joab, he killed Abner, you'll remember, after he had defected to David. Abner was the commander of the 10 tribes of Saul's army, and after Saul's death there was this civil war, and it worked out that in the end Abner defected with the 10 tribes, with his army, to David. And because he was given the role of commander, Joab killed him. And you'll remember it was done in deceit. Joab killed Amasa. This is in 2 Samuel chapter 20. As a reminder, Amasa was commander of Absalom's army. And in 2 Samuel, when the army of Absalom was defeated, David made Amasa commander in the place of Joab, and Joab had murdered them both. And so not only had Joab secretly tried to make this son of David king that should not have been king, and to do it secretly, he had these other issues that David asked Solomon to deal with. And Joab, he was executed by Benaiah. And then Benaiah took his place as the commander of Solomon's army. Shimei, the man that cursed David when he was on the run from Absalom, again Solomon showed mercy to him and said, you could continue live in Jerusalem, but do not cross the Wadi Kidron. In other words, he had him under city arrest, I guess we could call it. And after a time, he broke that trust, so he too was executed by Benaiah. And then we read about the blessing of Solomon on Barzillai. And so in this way, we see the kingdom consolidated for Solomon. As I reflect on these chapters, I just think of the tragedy of these individuals. Adonijah, that was not willing to allow the purposes of God to be fulfilled in his life, but wanted to grab power for himself. Throughout Joab's life, how he was not willing to release the role he had to others, but was murderous in his attempt to keep power for himself. And we think of the priest Abiathar, who was misusing his spiritual authority. And I think there's some great warnings for us, that as we live our lives, we are aware of the calling of God and hold any authority or any responsibility we have with an open hand, recognizing we're indeed servants of the Lord. The king of Israel was the under king of the living God. There was no right to that. God was the one that appointed kings and ministries. And the same with the responsibility of Joab. He was grabbing hold of power rather than holding these things with an open hand. And why would the priest Abiathar do what he did in this secret way rather than in an open way and misuse his spiritual authority? I think there's so many lessons for us in these chapters. And so we come to the end of chapter 2 and we read in verse 46, so the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. And now we're ready to look at Solomon's reign.